Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Beyond the Present podcast. My name is Daniel Mulligan, and today I'm joined live by Poujix from Canada. Hey there, my man, how's it going?
Everything's awesome. How are you?
I am doing wonderful, and guess what? We have Emaad back for the second part of our wonderful space episode. Emaad, buddy, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing terrific. And of course, we got all back here today again to discuss the second part of the podcast that we left off a few weeks back, which was about space life, space exploration, and of course, a lot of other things. Before we go any further, though, I just heard some story about the U.S. Space Force and how the world of politics might change from now on using basically space. So, anybody here knows about the exact details of the story?
Yeah, well, Trump was talking about creating another government entity taking care of anything space-related, safety, space, when you want to send shuttles into space. So you would basically coordinating with the Air Force, of course. But then there's an entity that is taking care of all of that. It's not just about like having actual flights into space. Actually, that's not part of it, although the name they gave it, Space Force, has a wrong connotation in that sense. But I mean, it could be that too. But the idea is more it includes a lot of other stuff as well.
Interesting. So I've heard that the wars of the future centuries, based upon what we have basically read in some books recently, will be mainly about things like water and food and very simple things. But of course, space will somehow change and alter this political dynamic quite radically. So let me move on first to Emaad here. We've already discussed a lot of the issues in our first part regarding life on other planets. And of course, I should tell you that I'm already disappointed because as a huge fan of basically things like Star Wars, Star Trek, and of course my favorite Mass Effect basically franchise, I've always been a huge fan of just getting on my ship and like literally going to some distant Andromeda or some cool, planets basically in the Milky Way or whatever it is. So you mentioned, of course, you ruined all of my fantasies on our last episode saying that is basically just fiction. It is not real, and there are so many challenges, and the time that it takes somehow to go to other planets will be a lot. So, despite all that you mentioned, now let's dive into this whole notion of Space Force first, before we address the other issues. What do you think about the political aspects of life, basically in the space and on other planets for the current governments on Earth?
Well, see, life has already been in space, like I mentioned before as well, and as we all know, people live on the International Space Station, and that is a very, very good example of a triumph of politics and diplomacy in general, just because of the fact that so many countries got together, especially the two of the world's biggest powers, who hate each other, essentially, and they're collaborating together to go into space. This notion of a space force brings in a bigger problem that now people will be focusing on fighting in space, which is something that we don't want. We already have people fighting on the ground. We already have people fighting in the airs, through air forces, through armies, and now it is opening up another domain, which was until now, which was very peaceful. People were coexisting peacefully over there. It was a very nice mesh of international collaboration in general. But now that it is being politicized, at least a little bit, at least it has started, I should say, it's going to bring a bunch of problems politically with regards to proliferation of arms in space and possibly very little maybe robot warfare. By robot, I mean drones or sort of robots that are controlled by humans on Earth fighting against each other.
Oh my!
Much at the moment, but it's a very bad thing that they're now politicizing something that is at the moment one of our greatest triumphs as humanity altogether.
Wow. So you're saying, like, for example, Trump's going to say, we got the biggest, coolest, nicest, goodest looking things in the space with all these cool things, and we're going to shoot them all at you. And Putin's going to respond like, we also have a lot of great things. We will beat your ass over there. See you in Mars. So you're saying, like, literally, these two countries are going to go at it in this space, and they're going to cause violence in the space because of what exactly? I mean, on Earth, most wars are fought for certain reasons, right? That we have, like, land, we have things like resources, but what's this war going to be on, in the space? What's the point of that?
That's the biggest question that everyone's asking. What's the point of a space force? And that is essentially the problem that I stated previously. That for up until now, it has been a very peaceful. It has been a very peaceful mission. It has been an achievement of humanity to go to space so peacefully, to collaborate with each other, to collaborate as one big unit. But now that these sort of diffractions are being brought up, if one country says, hey, I'm going to make a space force, then their closest rival, which is Russia, they're going to say, oh, we're going to send up a space force over there. That creates tension, and tension is bound to do something. Tension is bound to a spark. So even if there's nothing right now, it could light up a spark in any way possible. Let's say a small space fighting robot crosses an American space fighting robot crosses a Russian space fighting robot. It could create tensions for no reason. And it's just going to escalate political tension more and more and jeopardize a very, very peaceful and a very important achievement of humanity.
Before I move on to Poujix, I want to ask you about one more question. Are currently the top nations that are active in space, is it just the U.S. and Russia, or other nations are now also getting involved?
No, there are many other nations that are involved with the ISS. There's the European Space Agency. There's the Canadian Space Agency as well. There's Japan. There's many other countries that are involved. There's a whole list. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I know nearly all of the European countries are in. Japan's in. China's trying to do it. India's trying to do it.
So what is so special about Russia and America here in this case? Why these two just take all the credit for it?
The thing is, they have established infrastructures. America has sent people to space, and Russia has sent people to space. And so far, those are the only two countries in the world that have sent people to space. So they have the
So no other nationalities. So you're saying that no other nationalities have been on have been in the space other than Americans and Russians?
No. By that, what I mean is that Russians and Americans have sent people to space, meaning that people have launched from American soil and Russian soil. Oh. By Russian soil, I mean USSR, Kazakhstan is sort of involved with Russian.
Interesting. So you're saying that the infrastructure, like these spaceships, all of these are made in America and Russia, and people who are living now in space are using these things that are made in Russia or in the USA?
Yes, previously people went on the space shuttle, which was American. Now people go on the Soyuz rocket, which is Russian. China's working towards it. India's working towards it. Japan's working towards it. But so far, they've launched many different probes. They've launched many different rovers. They've launched those things. But as of right now, the two main countries that have sent humans to space of any nationality, those are the U.S. and Russia, and that is why it's so important.
Great point. Fantastic. So we'll be back in a moment. Let's move on to Poujix. So Poujix, what is your analysis regarding the political aspect of life in space, as well as all the other ramifications, including a space force or even space wars?
Yeah, I don't take a defense, or at least as defensive approach as Emaad does, and I'm a little bit more in favor of it. I don't think it's a necessity now, but I think it will become a necessity later. And I don't mean, so the part that I think is necessary to differentiate here, by Space Force, we don't mean actual force or actual army going in space, whether robot or human, to be stationed there. By Space Force, it's just a government entity. For example, you can think about Air Force. Air Force, of course, has some aspects that actually engages in warfare, but it does a lot of other things. It regulates commercial flights and American, space. Air Force. So when you fly over American soil, you have to have the permission of their Air Force, basically, at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So by that, for example, another proposal of the Trump administration is that we have a lunar base, a base on the moon, and then the question begs the question that who's going to be running that force, that base? It doesn't have to be army. It's just a base. So you're extracting, rocks off the moon. You want to do science, but you have to maintain that base on the lunar surface. What government entity is going to be taking care of that? A lot of people talked about NASA. But at the end of the day, it's on a completely different celestial body. You're having a little bit of difficulty shoving all of this into one entity. So hence the introduction of the Space Force. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's absolutely necessary at this point. I mean, I'm not really educated on the subject either, but based on the things that I hear from other experts, it doesn't seem to be super necessary, but there is a good census among a lot of the experts that actually can become super necessary very quickly. It's just the connotation of the wording that they offered, like Space Force. It has a negative connotation.
Exactly.
Just warfare, yeah. So, yeah, you can change the name, but the entity could be a very good entity, actually.
So far, you, Poujix, tend to be a lot more optimistic about this whole Space Force thing, whereas Emaad believes this could actually lead to some tension in the future. So right now, let us talk about...
I do agree that it can lead to tension. It doesn't just necessarily has to if it's played right.
Well, let us just right now think of some scenarios that this could actually lead to some sort of problem down the line. So what type of conflict can we expect to see if at some point, let's say the USA and Russia are going to go at it, and they're going to actually try to start a conflict in space. So we're going to move away from basically all Middle East and, Donetsk and all these areas, and we're going to start having a conflict between America and Russia, let's say in space. So, Emaad, how will such a conflict look like? I mean, is it going to be like Star Wars, like lasers moving around and the Darth Vader's forces just come in? And, what's going to be like? How does a space war... Because let's be honest, again, in the work of fiction, we've seen this a lot from Star Wars, even certain, for example, famous franchises in video games like Call of Duty. I'm not sure what it was called. Was it like Advanced Warfare? I don't know exactly what it was called, but we had these things like war in space and whatever. So how do you think space war will look like if at any point it actually occurs?
So the space war that you're sort of used to, the fictional space wars that we all are used to seeing in works of fiction, those are very, very, I would say they're very, very far from reality. Again, like we mentioned in the previous episode, there's many different problems with regards to how certain warcrafts can be maintained in space, they can be kept in space, how gravity can be created. But that aside, little conflicts could definitely occur in space. And the one biggest thing that I can think of, and that is something that Trump actually alluded to when he sort of justified the creation of the Space Force, which is that he's creating that to protect the United States interests and the United States' I would say the things that they put in space. And one major thing that a lot of these countries, a lot of big countries do put in space are satellites that spy on other countries. And say Russia was to go in space or send a robot in space that was meant to make defunct a satellite of the United States that they know is being used to
spy on them.
Spy on Russia.
Exactly.
That can not only cause tension up there if the U.S. sends something and then blows up a Russian satellite that they use for their own telecommunications, but it could be a very big problem on Earth as well.
I mean, you mentioned blow up. I mean, is that really right now? Is like that a possibility? I mean, how could they blow things up in space with the problem of the gravities and whatnot?
It is very tough to do so at the moment. However, you can send a projectile. You can have a projectile aimed in such a way that it could break something, that it could break break a satellite. There's space debris everywhere, and that occasionally hits the International Space Station as well. If you hear
How about actual explosions or like missiles? Could they actually work as well? Like, could they like use some of these things, like a missile that moves towards a spaceship and just causes a massive explosion?
I don't think that would be possible.
Again, I think that's too Call of Duty and like too Mass Effect, so fictional, I guess. It doesn't seem real to me personally.
Yeah, from my own understanding, I don't think that would be possible just because of the fuel that would be needed to have it transport all the way up there. And second, the conditions that are available on Earth for such explosions to occur, for such explosions to be deadly.
Exactly. The oxygen, for example, all those things, because space is a very different environment. It cannot be like you cannot just think of it like Baghdad with low gravity.
Yeah, exactly. You can't think of it like that. And the last thing would be that it's why would you do that when you can simply program a projectile to hit a satellite? That's really tough to do so because you have to look at orbital mechanics.
Again, let's get too nerdy here. How about like laser? Like, how about laser weapons? Is that like also just a work of fiction?
It's not a work of fiction. That's something that is being worked upon by, again, the United States and possibly other countries as well. I'm 100% sure. In the form of directed energy weapons. So they're basically directing a very, very high beam of light, which is very energetic and can hurt a lot of different things. That is being worked upon, but it isn't 100% functional, which is why we don't see it. We don't see it in everyday, I guess, wars that happen on Earth. We don't see them that often. But those are things that are being worked upon, not just visible lasers, but also X-ray lasers and lasers that are lasers in electromagnetic waves that are of higher frequencies as well, since those tend to be much more energetic.
Fantastic. Let me go back to Poujix here, because you are a bit more optimistic about this issue. And of course, I know one of your personal concerns for humanity is asteroids and how they can actually hit Earth at some point. So I'm guessing that it's generally, I think you have like this calendar with like the asteroid counter or something on your basically smartphone. But the point is, if we have some, let's say, Space Force up there, I think that, at least for you, would be a good thing, because, I mean, they might actually be able to fight that. But do you think with our current technology, it might be actually possible to fight asteroids using a Space Force?
We actually know we can actually, with our current technology, do anything if a supermassive asteroid is coming to wipe us out like it did 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs. But that's my point about an entity that is dealing with space and space security. So again, I agree with Emaad in the sense that the way that Trump administration has been trying to propose this idea is a little bit aggressive, on the aggressive side. But it doesn't mean that is completely empty of good notions. And one of those good notions is that you do need an entity to think about these stuff. During the Obama administration, there was, I believe in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not too sure about that, but at the second term of the Obama administration, there was a sign-off by Obama himself to think about a project called, I believe, Asteroid Arm, that basically intends to deflect asteroids if they're going to come and hit United States landmass anywhere that is populated on the United States. So the point being, yes, such an entity actually can do a lot of research-based projects that tends to. So right now, NASA has a system that is tracking all the bodies around the Earth, whether there are asteroids, comets, I don't know, others, satellites, all of them, from small to large. They are all being tracked at this point, and they can, if there is any change in their trajectory, they can actually know this. But that's just not enough, as you mentioned, because if such an asteroid is going to come towards Earth, then, well, if you can't do anything about it, what good is that? So, but
one question before I go further about this whole asteroid thing. So I'm not sure. You mentioned if asteroid hits the U.S. mainland. So is it possible for the asteroid to hit the Earth and just destroy some part of it and certain countries and not the other?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're saying it's like a Russian roulette. It's like luck. So, for example, maybe this thing will hit Earth, but not the U.S. And like Donald Trump saying, "Oh, guess what? We have the walls, and we just asteroid destroyed the walls. So I'm going to shut down the government unless you rebuild that wall." Something like this, right?
Yeah, but that's very much possible. Of course, I don't know what the future administration's policies will be, but that's very much possible that one side of the Earth is actually most likely, if an asteroid is going to hit, I don't think it would be so massive that it would actually impact the whole Earth. That would be possible, but unlikely in the likelihoods of the asteroids. So yeah, that's very much possible. Yeah.
Interesting. So the asteroids are only going to threaten certain unlucky nations that happen to be stricken exactly at that time.
Yeah, and actually recently, during our lifetime, asteroids have hit Earth quite often, but they were so small, or at least after entry, they broke into pieces. That either and we have most of our surface of the Earth is actually oceans, so either fall on the oceans, or one time, I don't remember which country, one of the Eastern European countries, if I'm not mistaken, it actually did hit the land, and people were close to the windows watching this asteroid coming down, and the impact was far away, but the shock waves came and blasting the windows, and a lot of injuries happened that way.
Wow.
So yeah, that does happen. Yeah.
And there is a
go ahead.
Note, on that note, there is a funny thing that I wanted to mention as well. That asteroids again do come very near Earth, and they explode in Earth's or near Earth's atmosphere. But in 2002, and this was a very important year because India and Pakistan were two countries who had a sort of standoff against each other, where they built up troops near the border. And at that time, both India and Pakistan were nuclear-powered countries, and there was an asteroid in 2002 that was heading towards Earth, and it actually exploded over the Mediterranean Sea. I think it was called the Eastern Mediterranean Event. But there were concerns by many different militaries around the world that if that asteroid was to blow up either over Pakistan or India, the country, either one of those countries could think the other one had sort of initiated a nuclear strike against them. So not only are they dangerous in the sense that they could harm people, but they could actually create even more tensions amongst countries.
And is it like possible for someone to actually use, like, let's say, a strong bomb, or like, sorry, that was just an asteroid. We didn't do anything. Sorry, not our fault.
You see, it could. I mean, that event was actually similar in power to a small atomic bomb as well.
Oh my gosh!
I think that would be very highly unlikely, just because astronomical data could be verified and then checked. But I don't think any country would do anything like that.
So I think Trump cannot go into it like, we just got a bomb from Russia. Let's press the red button. I finally have the right. It's not like this. So there are some data that can confirm this was, for example, an asteroid.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's going to be a lot of data that it's an asteroid. You will know that an asteroid is coming to Earth. We can detect it at least. We can detect it more than a couple of days before it does approach Earth. So it's that. However, it was just concern at that point that if it explodes on either one of those two countries, the other country could think that it's a nuclear bomb, and that's very dangerous as well.
Interesting. So now we talked about this. Go ahead.
Having said all of that, I'm not too worried about asteroids themselves because they're an unlikely event. The problem is that is my concern. If they were to happen and we got that information, as Emaad mentioned, days ahead, we have no defense against them.
Wow, that's so true. Now, with that being said, of course, so I'm guessing you can now go ahead, Poujix, and delete your asteroid daily counter. Hopefully you can worry about that one. But overall, what I do believe in right now is we should somehow think about this as citizens, as voters. I mean, like, what should we as citizens be concerned about regarding this whole Space Force? Because we already know that the world as it is today, we have a lot of problems, and there are right now a lot of basically tension already among the U.S., Russia, and many other nations. So to somehow add salt to injury, we're going to somehow deal with the Space Force problem as well, and how basically the voting habits of a certain nation might actually affect humanity in space. So what are the things that we should be concerned about right now, and could there be any solutions for those? So let me just move on to Emaad here. What are the ramifications for us on Earth, basically, as normal, average citizens?
In terms of what goes on in space?
Of course, and the danger that these conflicts up in the space can actually cause for us back in Earth.
Well, see, look, humanity has been in a state of war since it started.
Absolutely. And war never changes.
War never changes, and I agree. Some people might say that it is the only path to progress. However, there are better ways humanity can collaborate with each other and go towards progress. By Trump announcing a space force, and with the purpose that he explicitly stated that it would be to protect the U.S.'s interests, and it would be taking care of a war-fighting domain, and he called space another war-fighting domain. That's creating more and more tensions. If he had called it something else, if he had said, we're going to send humans to space, we're going to do more research up in space, we're going to create a space station on the moon in collaboration with other countries, so that we can explore outer space more, we can understand about our own origins, and we can understand more about the universe we live in. That's a better way to phrase it, rather than a space force, which is to take care of another war-fighting domain that has come up, which is space, and that's going to end up becoming more and more. That's going to create more and more tensions. Mm-hmm. We as want away from tension. We don't want more tension in this world. We know what we're capable of. We know we're capable of killing ourselves many, many times over. And with the president of a country saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to make sure that there's one domain where no one previously said, hey, we're going to fight there. If I say, hey, let's open this up and let's create a possibility of fighting there, that's just inviting more and more trouble, and that's not good for humanity as a whole.
Wow.
And that's something...
It's so true, but I don't think this problem isn't just limited to fight in space. I mean, let's be honest. If you have something like a space force, let's say you have the U.S. Space Force now, they could definitely also cause damage on Earth, couldn't they? Like, I mean, have some sort of missiles, some sort of damages on Earth, maybe even laser weapons. Could, like, the Space Force actually cause havoc on Earth? Because from my perspective, if asteroids are a real threat, so are weapons and, I don't know, laser weapons and laser beams floating into space somewhere. So do you think that this Space Force can actually cause problems and get involved with, warfares on Earth?
That's the biggest problem that I was going to state as well. That just like the Air Force not just fights in air with other planes, the Air Force also strikes the ground. So with them going to space as another war-fighting domain, with them opening that up, they're inviting other countries to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. With them doing that, with them politicizing and giving and having more arms in space, other countries are going to do the same to maintain a balance of power, and so that in case of another war, let's say two countries have a war, the U.S. is not the only one who's attacking with laser beams all the way from space. There's other countries as well, and again, that's this proliferation of more arms.
Oh my goodness!
Up another domain, and that's not good for humanity as a whole. It's good if you're thinking of military progress. It's good if you're thinking of more elaborate weapons. However, there should be a limit to where we go with that versus how we can actually use these things for our benefit.
Great point. Let's move on to Poujix. So what are the consequences for the people on Earth, and how does Space Force thing could actually pose a threat to the normal people living on Earth?
Well, I mean, Emaad mentioned a lot of good points, and yes, direct arms against Earth is a possibility, but I would be much more concerned if a conflict between two countries in space would actually escalate and create conflict between those two countries on Earth. Earth-based conflicts rise because of outer space conflict that arose between those two countries initially. So yeah, those things can all obviously happen, and definitely there are tensions there. So I would agree with the notion that other countries might take from Trump administration's initiatives, which are the things that we talked about up until now. But ultimately, I think, as you mentioned, what are the responsibilities of the citizens? I mean, yes, we do talk about the day-to-day stuff like, our jobs, economy, and that's very good. But we need to be able to talk about different stuff, such as this. It was people's votes who put Trump into White House, and now he's supposedly representing the people. So if that's if the people have never thought about this notion, then it's not necessarily their will. It could be, but we just don't know because they didn't think about it. So when they were voting, this was not an issue that they were thinking about.
Wow.
So yeah, we definitely that's good. We want to talk about these stuff. We want to talk about a lot of other stuff, and we want to. So another thing, for example, right now, we have this thing. Actually, me and Emaad were chatting about it yesterday. There's this thing called "Don't Let Go Canada." Canada's been reducing its investment in space, especially adjusting for inflation through the past 10 years, and we really want to. We have interest in space because as a country, Canada is a very large country, second only to Russia, but only 10% of the population of the United States. So some of the degree of control that Canada has over its country is actually from space technology. So and these are not really talked about in the politics of these years in Canada. So those are the things that we, as a population, as a civilization, as a people, we need to be concerned about when we're voting for our political leaders.
Well, so far, I think there's no major threat coming from Canada. I think the only crazy leader in the world right now is actually Donald Trump. So with that being said, I'm guessing that the biggest issue right now is how the United States will deal with the issue of Space Force. And of course, I'm not sure if, let's say, there's going to be some changes in the future of administration. I don't think that that will necessarily cancel out a Space Force. And quite frankly, I do not think that Space Force necessarily was Trump's idea. As you already mentioned, of course, Obama himself had a plan to actually set, because this is just a matter of just progress, right? And I don't personally think that Trump was smart enough to actually think of this thing, and I'm almost sure that's not his idea, although he puts his, aggressive touch on everything, but that does not necessarily mean that if it wasn't for Trump, then the U.S. would not want to somehow expand its interest in the space. But with all of that being said, of course, we don't like tension. And as we know, when things get political, tension arise, and the only place on earth, I mean, literally, I remember once myself, whenever I had a very somehow challenging and tough day, one of my basically ways to somehow let off steam was to just imagine I'm floating space in total peace and freedom, and like there are no sounds and nothing bothers you. And now with the Space Force, even that imagination has gone, basically, because now, like, dude, they're going to kill each other here as well. There's no place you can actually rest and relax. So that is so
however,
true.
I can comfort you there a little, because space is really, really big. So if you want to imagine yourself in space, you can go in Andromeda Galaxy and probably there's no...
By the way, is Andromeda a real galaxy or just fictional?
Yeah. No,
it is a galaxy.
It's a real galaxy.
Scheduled. Not scheduled, but it is supposed to collide with our galaxy, with the Milky Way.
Interesting. And how far is it from the Milky Way?
Many light years.
Oh, so it's a huge distance, right?
Yeah, it's a very huge distance, and it's supposed to crash into the Milky Way galaxy in billions of years. I think it's actually 2.5 million light years away.
2.5 million. And one question, what does it look like if two galaxies collide, like Andromeda and the Milky Way? What happens exactly?
For that, it's a very good. It would be a very good thing for all of the listeners here to do, which is to go on YouTube and search up galaxy merging simulations.
Oh my goodness!
That have been done by a lot of professors and a lot of universities, where they've just simulated what would happen when galaxies merge together, and it can be very chaotic. It can be very simple. those range with a multitude of different factors with regards to galaxies.
Interesting.
So me and Emaad are going to find a good link, and put it up in the description of this episode.
Fantastic. Bravo. So you can actually go check it out, see what happens if Andromeda and Milky Way gets linked up, because who cares? I love Mass Effect, and it happens both in Milky Way and Andromeda, so I love it all anyways. It's kind of like latte. You mix a coffee and the milk, you just mix them up together. Pretty good stuff. That's like my space, basically, latte. I'm going to enjoy that one. So overall, guys, we're running out of time here. Let's try to wrap up the show. Let's start with Poujix. So, Poujix, after all that we talked about space war and space tension, and of course the U.S. Space Force, which is going to basically get started. I'm not sure exactly when. Is it approved, by the way, by the Senate, or it's still just a matter of discussion?
As far as I know, it's just a matter of discussion, but
That's
I might be wrong. I don't know.
Very well. So let's go for a final comment. How do you wrap up this entire discussion, Poujix?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we like to talk about space. It's just fun, but we'd rather not talk about, concerns and fights in space. So if we can, it's fine to expand our initiatives into space as this Space Force supposedly is supposed to do, but we can put a nicer spin to it, as NASA has been doing this for decades, and they're doing a fantastic job. They're inspiring all the nations, all the people on Earth. When they were, for example, the Apollo era, like the most watched program worldwide at the time. These are amazing phenomena that can happen with expansion of activities in space, and that's great. But you can get people's attention by concern and fights and fear. You can also get people's attention by inspiration, and I would much rather use the inspiration for sure.
Fantastic. So, Emaad, what is your final thought about this discussion?
Well, I'm just going to sort of reiterate what I've been saying. As we've seen with so many different things, humanity can achieve so much if they come together and work together. We've seen this in the field of medicine. We've seen this in the field of industries. We've seen this in so many different fields. And I think it's very important that humanity comes together, as they have been previously, in exploring space, in figuring out, in learning from space, in learning about our own origins. And politicizations and sort of creating more tensions or creating things that would lead to more tensions shouldn't be of our primary concern, and this is something we shouldn't do as a humanity, just because of the progress that we'll be losing, and the peace that we would be losing altogether.
What a wonderful discussion, full of Star Wars theory, man. I just literally want to start reading some of those nerdy TV series back again, just to see what happens. But overall, that was a very great discussion. I want to thank both you, Emaad, as well as Poujix, for your great ideas. You're both astrophysicists, so you know what you're talking about, and I really appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And of course, to you, our listeners, do you know that the Podbean has actually a very nice app, both on the iOS as well as Android? This way, you can actually be in touch with us. As earlier Poujix mentioned, a lot of our shows have certain contents that are additional, certain photos, certain material, certain videos, and certain links that are only available if you access our podcast directly on btppp.podbean.com, or simply download the Podbean app and follow us there as well. So if you want to find all the information, please check out Podbean app for both iOS as well as Android. This is all the time we have for. My name is Daniel Mulligan, and this was Beyond the Present Podcast.